February 1st, 1943, 2:11 p.m. Over the Gulf of Tunis, high above the docks at Tunis and Bizerta. The sky is bright enough to hurt your eyes, but up here it feels cold. Thin air, wind screaming around aluminum skin. The B-17F flying fortress shudders as flak bursts bloom nearby like dirty black flowers. Not close enough to hit. Not yet. The bomber formation holds tight anyway. Silver aircraft stacked in disciplined geometry, each ship trusting the others to keep the fighters off their backs. Inside, one fortress, serial 41 to 24,406, painted name All-American. You can taste the tension in the intercom silence. On the flight deck, Lieutenant Kendrick Sonny Bragg, Jr. grips the yoke with gloved hands that look calm and don't feel calm. Beside him, his co-pilot Godfrey Engel, Jr. watches the gauges like they're a heartbeat monitor. The cockpit glass is spotted with grime and salt haze. Below, the coastline is a sharp, sunlit blade. Above, the contrails are thin scratches across the blue. Then the intercom cracks alive, sharp, urgent. Fighters, 2 o'clock hot. You don't see them at first. Just a flicker. Then the flicker resolves into a diving shape. A Messerschmitt Bf-109, nose down, closing fast. A fortress isn't a fighter. It doesn't jink like a sparrow. It lumbers, heavy with fuel and bombs and gravity. The gunners swing their .50s and the sky fills with stitched tracer lines. Red-orange beads racing toward the oncoming threat. The Bf-109 keeps coming anyway, punching through the defensive fire like it's already decided it won't be alive long enough to regret it. The first attacker is driven off. Someone yells that he's hit, spinning away. Yet the second one commits harder. The 109 rolls into a head-on pass, then tries to brake, and doesn't. Maybe the pilot is wounded. Maybe he's dead. Later, the name attached to this moment will be Erich Paxia, a Luftwaffe ace reported with 16 victories. But in the cockpit of All-American, it isn't a name. It's a shape, a closing inevitability. The fighter's wing rises, too close, filling the windscreen for half a second like a metal scythe. Then impact, not a clean crash, an ugly, grinding collision that sounds like the whole aircraft is being torn open with a giant can opener. The fortress lurches. The controls kick. The airframe screams. Something shatters behind them with a violence that makes your teeth clack together. A voice yells from the rear, high and panicked. We're hit. Tail, tail. The back of the aircraft feels wrong. The vibration changes pitch. The bomber starts to wander as if the wind has suddenly found a new grip on it. Brad corrects with the yoke, tiny movements, careful, like he's trying not to startle a wounded animal. Engel twists in his seat, trying to look back, but there's only bulkhead and intercom and the sound of air pushing through new holes. Report. Brad barks. There's a pause, too long, filled with roaring wind. Then the tail gunner's voice comes back, strained, unreal. Sir, the tail's it's hanging. You can almost picture it even before you see it. Metal peeled back, control surfaces shredded, the aircraft spine cut and barely held together by a few stubborn pieces of structure. The Bf-109 didn't just clip them. It carved through the fortress's rear fuselage in a diagonal gash, carrying away the left horizontal stabilizer and elevator, leaving the tail section barely attached. Somewhere back there, control cables are severed. The airplane's ability to behave has been ripped away, and now the crew is split between two instincts that hit like fists. Bail out. Try to fly, because every man on 8B-17 knows what a compromised tail means. The tail isn't decoration, it's stability. It's authority. Lose it, and the fortress can suddenly become a spinning, falling piece of metal with 10 souls inside. Bragg forces his eyes forward. He can't see the damage. He can only feel it through the aircraft, through the way the nose wants to drift, through the way the controls answer with a sluggishness that doesn't belong to a healthy airplane. Can you move the rudder? Engel asks, voice tight. Bragg tests it, small pressure, then more. Nothing clean comes back. Behind them, gunners and crewmen are yelling conflicting fragments. One says the tailplane is gone. Another swears the rear fuselage is split open. Someone says the fighter's debris came through the aircraft. A man coughs. Another man prays without realizing he's doing it. Outside, the formation begins to tighten around them. Other fortresses nudging closer, trying to shield the crippled ship from any fighter that wants to finish the job. The escorting bombers can see what Bragg can't. The back end of All-American is hanging on by the bare stubborn thread of aluminum and faith. The intercom carries the next question in a voice that's trying to sound like procedure. Do we bail out? And that's when Bragg makes the choice that separates legend from common sense. He doesn't answer right away. He reaches for something else, something that wasn't meant for this. The autopilot system tied to the Norden bombsight controls, electric servos that can move rudder and elevator through wiring rather than severed cables. It's a trick, a workaround, a mechanical prayer. He engages it carefully like touching a live wire. The Fortress steadies, just a fraction, enough to feel the aircraft stop trying to kill itself for one precious moment. The crew feels it too, the way you feel a car stop sliding on ice. But the relief is razor thin, because the fighters may come back, and because the tail, half a tail less than half, is still hanging behind them in the slipstream, vibrating with every gust, threatening to tear away completely. Bragg looks out at the coastline and makes the only kind of plan you can make in a moment like this. Point it toward home. Keep it level. Don't let the airplane know you're scared. And as All-American turns, slowly, tremblingly, away from the target area, the crew finally gets a glimpse through a side window as the aircraft banks. They see it. The rear fuselage split open like a wound. The tail section sagging at a sick angle. Daylight shining where metal should be. One crewman whispers the thought everyone is afraid to say out loud. How is it still attached? No one answers because at that exact moment, the intercom crackles again, sharp with urgency. Fighters, again. 6 o'clock. And the wounded Fortress, with its tail hanging by a few stubborn spars, heads into the open sky knowing the next attack might be the one that finally snaps it clean off. Fighters, again. 6 o'clock. The words hit the intercom, and every man in the aircraft reacts differently, because every man knows where 6 o'clock lives on AB-17. It lives in the dead zone behind the tail, and their tail is barely there. The rear gunner's position is supposed to be the last word in the argument, twin point 50s guarding the formation like a locked door. But now that door is hanging off its hinges, and the wind is roaring through the torn fuselage like the aircraft has been gutted. In the back, the tail gunner's voice comes through, thin, strained, fighting against the screaming slipstream. I can't get a clean line. She's moving. He isn't complaining. He's reporting the impossible. The tail section is vibrating and sagging in the airflow, shifting his view, shifting his aim. Every tiny gust makes the whole rear end wag like a broken limb. The top turret gunner rotates, searching the sky, and the ball turret below swivels like an anxious eye. The waist gunners press their faces to their gun sights, scanning for the glint of wings. Everyone is waiting for the next diving shape to come finish what the collision started. In the cockpit, Bragg's hands stay light on the yoke. Too much correction could rip the tail off. Too little correction, and the bomber could slide into a slow roll it can't recover from. Engel leans in close, voice low, steady on purpose. If we get a gust from the wrong direction. He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The sentence ends in spin. And 8B, 17 in a spin at altitude, is a coffin that turns. Bragg keeps the Fortress as level as he can and nudges her away from the formation, letting the healthier ship slide between them and the attackers. It's a brutal instinct. The wounded animal retreats under the herd. But even that maneuver is delicate. Bank too hard and the tail tears. Bank too little and you don't clear the danger. Outside, tracers appear, bright red needles streaking past the right wing. Someone is already firing. Then, out of the sun, a fighter drops. For a second, it looks like it's aimed directly at the exposed wound in the fuselage, like it can smell weakness. The waist guns hammer, the aircraft shuddering with recoil. Brass casings tumble and spin in the slipstream. The fighter flashes closer, and you can almost see the pilot's canopy, the dark shape of his helmet. Then the fighter snaps away, hard, climbing out of the kill zone. Another follows, then another. The gunners fire until the barrels feel like they're melting. The air fills with cordite and shouted corrections. Hi, lead him, now. And through all of it, the Fortress keeps flying. Not because she's healthy, but because Bragg has tricked her into stability with that improvised control link. The autopilot servos hum, doing the delicate work the severed cables can't. It isn't smooth. It's not even reliable. But it's something, a mechanical hand holding the aircraft level while the crew fights for the chance to keep breathing. In the radio room, the operator tries to push out a message, but the words come out clipped, half swallowed by static. Aircraft damaged, tail, request vector, nearest friendly field. There's no guarantee anyone hears him. There's no guarantee anyone can help even if they do. The bomber's on its own now. And inside the fuselage, men start doing a second kind of combat, against the aircraft itself. A section of the floor is littered with fragments, twisted metal, insulation, broken plexiglass. A crewman crawls aft, staying low, feeling the cold wind claw at his gloves. He looks toward the torn rear fuselage and sees daylight where structure should be, sunlight cutting through like a spotlight on a crime scene. The tail isn't just damaged. It's missing, and what remains is barely attached, held by torn longerons and stubborn rivets that weren't designed to carry this kind of load. The crewman reaches for a panel edge and feels it vibrating so hard it numbs his fingers. Back in the cockpit, Bragg keeps his voice flat, procedure over panic. Everybody stay put. Keep weight centered. No sudden movement. It sounds absurd, like a superstition, but weight shifts matter when your stabilizer is gone. A man walking at the wrong moment can change a vibration, start a wobble, push the tail closer to failure. The bomber drifts into rougher air, edge of a weather layer, turbulence that a healthy aircraft would shrug off. This one doesn't shrug. She twitches. The nose yaws left, then right like the plane is about to argue with the sky. The tail section wobbles in the slipstream. And for a heartbeat, the entire aircraft feels loose, as if the rear end is about to peel away and the rest of the fortress will suddenly have nothing to balance on. Bragg doesn't yank the yoke. He breathes once, slow, and makes a correction so small it's more felt than seen. The autopilot servos whine, nudging control surfaces that still respond. The plane steadies, barely. In the waist, one gunner whispers to the other, not for conversation, just to prove there are still human voices in this metal tube. She's gonna hold. The other answers without looking away from the sky. She's got her. Minutes stretch. The fighters finally break off, either driven away by the formation's combined guns or deciding this wounded ship is already dead and not worth the ammunition. The flak bursts fade behind them. The coastline slides away. The horizon opens into long, empty distance. Only then does the crew truly feel how fragile their situation is, because now they have to cross open water and reach a friendly strip, with an aircraft that's held together by a damaged spine and a workaround. Fuel consumption becomes a new terror. Engine temps, oil pressure, the way the aircraft vibrates at certain speeds, like a warning bell. Bragg chooses a throttle setting that feels like walking a tightrope. Too fast, and the airflow may rip the tail away. Too slow, and they lose altitude and control authority. Below, the sea looks calm, almost mocking. Above, the sky is too wide. And somewhere ahead, far beyond the cockpit glass, a thin line of desert and airfield waits, if they can find it in time. Then the next problem arrives like an ambush. The bomber begins to descend. Not a planned descent. Not yet. Just a subtle loss of altitude that Bragg feels through the yoke before the altimeter confirms it. The controls are getting heavier. The aircraft is tiring. And the sun is dropping toward the afternoon angle that turns everything into glare, exactly the kind of light that makes a runway hard to spot until you're almost on top of it. Engel looks at Bragg, voice quiet. Even if we reach the field, how do we land this thing? Bragg doesn't answer immediately, because the truth is sitting there between them, heavy as a bomb. A B-17 with a shattered tail can fly. But landing is when the sky stops forgiving you. In the moment they lower speed, the wobble that's been held at bay might come roaring back, harder than any fighter. Bragg stares out at the horizon, searching for a strip of earth that can save them. Then the intercom crackles again, this time not with a warning, but with a terrified realization from the rear. "Sir, something's changing back here." A pause. Then, in a voice that goes tight with dread, I think the tail's starting to peel. I think the tail's starting to peel." The words land in the cockpit like a weight. Bragg doesn't turn around. He can't afford to. He keeps his eyes forward, hands steady on the yoke, because the moment he looks away is the moment the aircraft reminds him it's not a machine anymore. It's an argument with wind, gravity, and torn metal. Engel leans toward the instrument panel, then toward the windshield, scanning for anything that looks like land. The sea below has that endless, indifferent sheen, sunlight breaking on waves like scattered coins. The bomber's shadow isn't visible out here. Nothing is. It feels like they're suspended in a place where up and down are suggestions. Tail section status, Bragg says into the intercom, voice flat, almost routine. Not because it is routine, but because routine is the only thing holding fear at arm's length. A pause. The rear gunner's breathing is loud in the headset, fighting the roar of wind. "It's moving more. I can see daylight through," he swallows. "It's flexing, sir, like it's trying to tear away." The fortress give a little twitch right on cue, as if to confirm the report. Not a dramatic lurch, just a subtle shiver that makes every man on board go perfectly still. You can almost feel it, the instinct to grip something, the instinct to shift your weight, to brace. And the knowledge that bracing could make it worse. Bragg's mind runs through the physics without using the word physics. Airspeed equals load. Gusts equal load. Every vibration at the wrong frequency equals load. And the tail, what's left of it, has already been asked to do the job of a full structure while missing half its bones. Everybody stay where you are, he says again. No moving aft. Keep weight forward. In the waist, one of the gunners presses his palm against the fuselage skin and feels it trembling, like the whole aircraft is humming at a pitch just below panic. The cold wind sneaks in through torn seams and makes his eyes water. He wipes them and sees black streaks of oil and grime on his glove. Engel points through the windshield. A faint line on the horizon. Not cloud, not haze. Land. The North African coast comes up slow, then faster. Sand and scrub and hard angles. Runways and revetments, and a shimmering heat layer that makes the world look like it's melting. Somewhere down there is home, or at least friendly ground. But getting to land isn't the problem. Getting down to land is. Bragg begins a gradual descent, careful, almost apologetic, easing the fortress lower as if he's asking permission from the airframe. The altimeter needle creeps. Engine sounds change slightly. The aircraft's vibration shifts pitch, and the tail responds with another twitch, small but unmistakable. In the back, the tail gunner's voice rises. It's worse when we change power. He stops, breath catching. Sir, it's flapping. Flapping. Like fabric. Except it's aluminum and cables and torn stringers. And if it flaps too hard, it tears. And if it tears, the whole aircraft loses what little stability it has left. Bragg doesn't curse. He doesn't shout. He just tightens his focus until the world becomes the yoke, the horizon, and the smallest possible movements. Engel, he says quietly. If we start to you, call it early. Don't wait. Engel nods, even though Bragg can't see him. He knows what you means right now. It means the aircraft is trying to roll. Roll means the damaged tail is no longer holding the airplane's back end in line. Roll means spin, and you don't recover from a spin when half your tail is already gone. They come in toward the field, and it looks normal. That's the strangest part. A runway laid out on the earth like a simple solution. Control tower. Dispersal areas. A few vehicles moving. Perhaps other aircraft parked with wings like folded arms. But up in the cockpit, the runway doesn't feel like safety. It feels like the most dangerous place in the world. Because to land, they have to slow down. And slowing down is when the air stops pinning the aircraft into stability. It's when the wounded tail has to do more work with less airflow and might fail completely. Bragg lines up at the runway from farther out than usual. No tight turns. No steep bank. He wants a straight, gentle approach like a man walking on thin ice. Okay, he says almost to himself. We're going to do this smooth. Engel reaches for the landing gear handle, then pauses, looking at Bragg. Bragg hesitates for a fraction of a second. Because landing gear isn't just gear. It's drag. It's airflow disturbance. It's a shift in the aircraft's behavior. A healthy fortress absorbs that change like a shrug. This one might react like it's been stabbed. Not yet, Bragg says. Give me another minute. They hold the glide. Engines set, nose slightly down. The runway grows slowly in the windshield. Heat shimmer dances above it like a mirage. It's real. It's right there. The tail gunner's voice comes in again, quieter now, like he's afraid sound itself might break something. It's still holding. Still holding. The most fragile phrase in the English language. Bragg lowers the nose a hair to keep speed up, just enough to keep airflow over what remains of the tail surfaces. His instincts are fighting each other. Land fast and you might stay controllable, but land fast and you might break the gear, bounce, lose it anyway. Land slow and you might stall, and then the tail doesn't matter because the wings quit first. He chooses a middle road that feels like gambling with loaded dice. Gear, he finally says. Engel pulls the handle. There's a whir, then a heavy mechanical clunk as the landing gear begins to cycle down. The aircraft immediately changes tone, drag grabbing at the fortress like an unseen hand, the nose wanting to drop, the tail wanting to wag. The bomber shudders. In the back, the tail gunner blurts, "There, that did it." The aircraft yells left, a slow, ugly drift that Bragg corrects with gentle pressure. The servos whine. The rudder response is sluggish. The correction overshoots just slightly, and the plane yells back right. A pendulum. A sick pendulum. You can feel it in your stomach. The beginning of a sway that could grow with every second if they don't kill it now. Bragg holds steady, dampening the oscillation with tiny, careful inputs. Engel watches the airspeed needle like it's a fuse. Speed's bleeding, Engel says. I know, Bragg answers, voice tight now. Keep calling it. They're close enough to see men on the ground looking up. From the tower, from the apron, from wherever they are, people have noticed this fortress coming in wrong. Too ragged, too unsteady, tail visibly broken. Ground cruise point. A truck starts rolling. Someone runs. But help on the ground doesn't matter if the aircraft can't stay airborne long enough to touch it. The runway fills the windshield now, wide, inviting, terrifying. Bragg eases the throttle back a fraction. The fortress wobbles, and the tail gunner's voice spikes into the intercom, pure alarm. Sir, SIR, it's... A metallic scream cuts through the aircraft, high and sharp, like a piece of the bomber has just snapped. Engel's eyes widen. Bragg feels the yoke go light in his hands for a split second, too light. The kind of light that means something behind them has finally let go. The yoke goes light in Bragg's hands for a heartbeat. So light it feels like the airplane has suddenly stopped being an airplane. Just a falling idea. Engel's head snaps toward the side window, trying to see the tail without turning his whole body. In the back, the intercom explodes with overlapping voices, shouts, curses, a strangled gasp that doesn't finish its sentence. Then the fortress bucks. Not a full lurch, something subtler, more terrifying. A shift in the aircraft balance, like a man whose knee has just given out mid-step. The nose wants to wander. The rudder feels mushy. The elevator response is vague, delayed, as if the controls are being transmitted through water instead of cables and metal. Bragg doesn't say what he's thinking, because saying it gives it power. But he's thinking it. The tail finally tore further. Maybe not fully off yet, but enough. Enough to turn a hard landing into a coin flip. The runway is rushing toward them now, the painted markings expanding, the heat shimmer dissolving into texture. Rubber skid marks, small imperfections, reality. On the ground, men are pointing, frozen in that helpless way you get when you're watching someone else's disaster unfold and you can't intervene. Engel's voice cuts in, tight and controlled. Airspeed dropping. We're right on the edge. Bragg holds a nose down a hair longer than he wants to. He can't let the fortress bleed speed too early. A stall with a shattered tail isn't a stall. It's a snap into chaos. But if he keeps speed too high, he'll touch down hard enough to shear the gear, and then the aircraft will cartwheel, and then nothing matters. You can almost feel his muscles doing math. Throttle, pitch, sink rate, drift, each input reduced to the smallest possible motion, like he's handling a glass of water while walking a tightrope. Okay, Bragg says, and the word isn't reassurance. It's a command to himself. Okay, easy. He eases the throttles back, just a breath. The fortress sinks. The runway rises. The airplane wobbles once more, that pendulum sway threatening to grow, and Bragg kills it with tiny, patient corrections. The servos hum. The aircraft resists, then, miraculously, settles. Below them, the runway is close enough that you can see it moving under the nose like a conveyor belt. Hold, 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 Engel murmurs as if saying it out loud can keep the wings flying. Bragg begins the flare, the gentle nose-up movement that's supposed to bleed off the last bit of speed before touchdown. And the fortress answers with a shiver. Not defiance, more like fatigue. Like an exhausted man trying to stand straight one more time. Bragg freezes the flare at the smallest angle he dares. Too much flare in the tail, already broken, could slap the air in some ugly way and throw them into a stall. Too little, and they'll hit fast. He chooses the smallest possible flare. A compromise with gravity. The wheels kiss the runway. For half a second, it's almost smooth. So smooth that a part of the crew believes, irrationally, that they've made it and the danger is over. Then the landing gear takes the load, and the aircraft reacts like it's been struck. A hard jolt travels up through the fuselage, through the seats, through the crew's bones. The fortress bounces, one short, brutal hop, and Bragg slams the yoke forward just enough to keep the nose from climbing. The tail, hanging behind them, whips in the disturbed airflow. The whole aircraft is left. Bragg corrects. The aircraft is right. The runway edges blur past, in peripheral vision. Engel's hands hover near the throttles, ready to shove power back in if they have to go around. But going around might be impossible now. Power means torque. Torque means yaw. Yaw means the tail can't hold. and then they're airborne again with fewer control surfaces than they had 10 seconds ago. And yet, they're still on the ground. Bragg rides the rudder pedals gently, resisting the instinct to stomp. He knows overcorrection is death. The fortress settles, the wheels biting, the tires squealing as rubber finally decides to cooperate. "Stay with me," Bragg whispers, and you don't know if he's speaking to the airplane or to himself. Engel reaches for the brakes. Bragg shakes his head once, almost imperceptible. "Not yet. Let her roll." Braking hard could shift weight forward and unload what remains of the tail, starting a new oscillation. The fortress is a wounded animal. You don't yank a wounded animal by the leash. So they let her run. The runway is long, thank God. The bomber rattles down it with a sick, uneven rhythm, tail section shuddering behind them like a loose trailer. In the waist, gunners brace themselves against bulkheads. In the rear, someone is praying out loud now, no longer caring if anyone hears. Bragg eases the power back to idle. The engines settle into a lower roar. The aircraft finally begins to slow in a way that feels controlled. And then, when he's sure the wobble is gone, when he's sure the fortress has accepted the ground, "Brakes," he says. Engel applies them carefully, gently at first, then more as speed drops. The nose dips. The tail section shakes, once, then holds. The aircraft rolls to a stop that feels like silence after an explosion. For a second, nobody speaks. You can hear cooling metal ticking. You can hear wind buffeting the torn fuselage. You can hear someone breathing too fast. Then the intercom crackles with a voice from the back, raw with disbelief. "We were down. On the ground, trucks and ambulances are already moving. Men are running toward the aircraft, pointing at the tail as if their eyes can't accept it. Because now, in full daylight, the damage is obscene. Rear fuselage split, stabilizer missing, tail section hanging like a broken jaw. A ground crewman reaches the side of the aircraft and looks up, mouth slightly open, and you can almost hear what he's thinking. How did this thing not come apart? Bragg unclips his harness with hands that are suddenly clumsy. Engel does the same. In the cockpit, the adrenaline drains so quickly it feels like weakness. Bragg stands, knees unsteady, and takes one step back toward the crew compartments. And when he looks through the aircraft, when he finally sees from the inside what the wind has been doing to them, he feels a cold wash of delayed fear. The tail section isn't just damaged. It's barely attached at all. A few structural members, torn metal, and stubborn rivets holding it like a hinge that shouldn't exist. And then someone on the ground shouts up, half warning, half amazement. "Don't move around back there. That tails." He doesn't finish, because at that moment, a gust of wind hits the aircraft's rear. The dangling tail section flexes once, hard, and a fresh metallic groan ripples through the fuselage. Bragg freezes. So does everyone else, because they realize something horrifying. They landed. They stopped. But the airplane still hasn't finished deciding whether it's going to fall apart. The gust hits the broken tail, and the whole aircraft groans, an ugly, metallic complaint that travels through the fuselage like a warning shot. Every man freezes. On the ground, the crew chiefs and mechanics slow down as they approach, instincts screaming the same thing Bragg is thinking. If that tail is going out, it doesn't just fall off, it tears. It rips, twists, and can whip into the rear fuselage like a giant piece of sheet metal, the kind of last insult that kills someone after they've already survived the impossible. "Nobody go aft," someone yells from below, waving a hand like he's trying to physically hold the tail in place with air. Inside the bomber, boots stop moving. A waist gunner has one foot lifted to step back toward the rear and simply holds it there, then lowers it carefully as if the floor might crack under him. Bragg raises his voice, not loud, controlled. "Stay forward. Don't touch anything. Don't lean on the skin." The crew obeys with the calm obedience of men who have learned, in the last hour, that small movements can kill. Outside, the first maintenance man reaches the underside of the rear fuselage and looks up. His face changes. It's not the look of a man seeing damage. It's the look of a man seeing a magic trick and not understanding where the wires are. The rear fuselage is split like a zipper, torn open. Structural members are bent, some fractured, some still holding. The left horizontal stabilizer is gone. The elevator control area is mangled. And the tail section, what's left of it, hangs at a sick angle, suspended by a few stubborn strips of metal and the kind of luck that makes people superstitious. A crew chief climbs onto a ladder and leans in just enough to inspect. then snaps back as another light wind gust makes the tail flex. He points, shouting to another mechanic. Get shoring. Get timber. Anything. Prop that thing before it decides to finish falling. Men rush to fetch supports, wooden braces, stands, anything that can take the weight and stop the tail from vibrating. They move like they're defusing a bomb, because in a way they are. A tail section that collapses unpredictably can cut, crush, and kill. Near the nose, the aircraft door opens and daylight floods the cockpit area. Bragg steps down onto the ground, boots finally touching something that isn't vibrating. His knees feel strangely weak, like the earth has less friction than it used to. Engel follows, blinking in his sunlight, face set in that expression pilots were when they've kept fear behind their teeth for too long. Someone on the ground shouts, "That your ship?" Bragg nods once. The man looks up at the tail again, then back at Bragg, as if he expects a punchline. How in God's name? Bragg doesn't answer. He doesn't have a neat sentence for it. The only honest answer is, we didn't let it know it was dying. Behind them, the crew begins climbing down, one at a time, careful, staying forward, using the ladder like it's made of glass. A waist gunner's hands shake now that he isn't gripping a gun. A radio operator sits on the ground the moment his boots hit dirt, because his body has finally decided it's allowed to feel the weight of what just happened. A medic moves through them, checking faces, looking for blood that isn't obvious. A crewman laughs once, short and sharp, and then it turns into a cough because laughter and panic live close together when you're finally safe enough to collapse. Someone takes a photograph, then another, because the ground crews know what they're looking at. A flying fortress that returned with damage so extreme it feels like it violates the rules of flight. Those photos will travel. They'll become proof in mess halls and briefing rooms. Evidence that fortress wasn't just a nickname. But the men who flew it don't feel like symbols right now. They feel tired. They feel empty. They feel like they left something of themselves up in that cold air over the coast. A maintenance officer, clipboard, grease on his sleeves, walks up to Bragg and Engel, looking past them at the aircraft like a doctor staring at a patient who should be dead. "Lieutenant," he says, voice low, respectful, "I want you to tell me exactly what happened." Bragg begins with the simplest truth. A fighter hit us, took the tail. The officer's eyes narrow. "And you kept her controllable?" Engel answers before Bragg can. "We used the autopilot, tied into the bomb site controls. The cables were not doing what cables are supposed to do." The officer whistles softly, not for drama, because he understands the risk of relying on servos and systems never meant to be your only lifeline. He scribbles notes, then looks back up. "Anyone hurt?" "Some bruises," Bragg says. "Nothing worse than that." The officer nods slowly like he's processing the cost of luck. Then he glances at the tail again, at the torn metal fluttering faintly in the breeze, and says the sentence that quietly reframes everything. "If you'd banked her hard one more time, she'd have separated." "Now might have. Would have." Bragg doesn't respond. He just stares at the aircraft, imagining the moment in the flare when the yoke went light, imagining what separated would have looked like at 50 feet above a runway. A cold shiver crawls up his spine, delayed fear arriving late like a bill. Around the bomber, mechanics finally get supports in place. They prop the rear section carefully, reducing the flex, calming the wounded structure. The tail stops trembling so violently. The aircraft looks less like it's about to die on the ground. Only now do the crewmen allow themselves to breathe like normal humans again. And as the adrenaline fades, something else rises. Anger. Not at the enemy, not even at the fighter pilot, just at the absurdity of it all. A waist gunner stares up at the missing stabilizer and mutters, "We were finished. We were finished back there." Another replies, voice rough, "Yeah, and we didn't tell her." They stand there in sunlight, staring at their ship, and for a moment the war feels very close and very personal. Not maps, not arrows, not briefings, just metal and bodies and thin margins. Then a ground officer approaches with a message, paper in hand, expression unreadable. He looks at Bragg and Engel and says, almost casually, "Command wants to know if he can ferry her to a depot after repairs, or if we strip her here." Bragg's eyes flick back to the tail, still held up now by braces like crutches. "Ferry her," Engel repeats, half incredulous. The officer nods. "If she can fly." Bragg doesn't answer immediately. His jaw tightens, because the question isn't can a B-17 fly. He knows the answer to that. The question is whether this B-17, this battered fortress held together by luck, servos, and stubborn rivets, can take off again without the sky finishing what the fighter started. Bragg looks at his crew, men alive because they made a dying aircraft behave, and then back at the plane. And in his silence, you can feel the next chapter forming. They survived the air battle. They survived the approach. They survived the landing. But the war has a cruel habit of asking one more thing, right when you think you've paid enough. The question hangs in the air, ferry her, and it feels like someone asking a man with a broken leg if he'd like to run a mile. Bragg doesn't laugh. He doesn't get angry. He just keeps looking at the rear of the aircraft where the tail is now propped on makeshift braces like a wounded animal on splints. The metal has stopped fluttering so violently, but only because the ground crews have physically stopped it from moving. In the air, there will be nothing to stop it. Nothing except rivets and hope. Engel steps closer to the fuselage and runs a hand along the skin. Careful, respectful, like he's touching a survivor. His glove comes away with grime and oil. He looks at the torn edge of a long run and sees where the metal has been stressed white, the way steel looks right before it finally gives up. Not a chance, Engel says quietly. Bragg nods once. Not again. The ground officer shrugs, not offended, not surprised. In wartime, the difference between repair and scrap is often decided by what you can afford to risk. And nobody who has seen this tale in daylight wants to gamble 10 lives on a second miracle. So the decision is made. The aircraft is written off as a non-combat loss or sent for salvage where it sits. The mission is over in the administrative way missions end. Paperwork, signatures, an entry in a logbook that tries to make an impossible flight look like something ordinary. But the crew can't file it away that neatly. In the hours after landing, the story begins to spread the way stories spread in wartime. Fast, hungry, and slightly distorted at the edges because people need it to be true. A mechanic tells another mechanic, "You should have seen it. Half the tail was gone." A pilot walking past stops, stares, and says, "No way that flew." Then someone answers, "It did." And the word "did" becomes a kind of medicine. Because the war over Europe is full of bad news. Full of crews who don't come back. Full of empty bunks and unclaimed gear. Full of silence at debriefings where a seat stays vacant and everyone pretends not to notice. This story is different. This story is proof that sometimes the sky gives you one more chance. They take photos. They measure the damage. They write down serial numbers and details. The images travel to other airfields, other groups, other men who will fly tomorrow and need something to hold on to besides fear. The flying fortress becomes not just a machine, but a rumor with rivets. A crew chief pins a photo to a wall. A navigator points at it and shakes his head in disbelief. Someone jokes that it's held together by prayer and chewing gum. Someone else replies, dead serious, it's held together by crewmen doing their jobs. Because that's the truth beneath the legend. 10 men kept calm, kept weight centered, kept the aircraft level, kept firing, kept thinking, while the airplane tried to fall apart around them. And there's another truth too, darker, the kind the legend doesn't always include. The fighter pilot. The collision wasn't an accident like two cars bumping in traffic. It was violence at closing speed, two machines meeting in midair because one pilot came too close in a pass and lost control or was hit at the wrong moment. Somewhere out there in the same sky, a Luftwaffe pilot didn't come home either. If it really was Eric Paxia, then the collision was the last moment of a man who had already survived enough missions to be called an ace, only to die in a split second of metal and wind. War takes its stories from both sides. It just doesn't share them evenly. That night, the crew of All-American sits in a dim tent or barracks, still smelling of smoke and sweat and oil. Someone hands out coffee that tastes burnt. Someone else passes cigarettes. Men talk in fragments at first, short sentences, unfinished thoughts, because the mind is still rewinding the day like film. A waistgunner says, "When the tail started wagging, I thought we were done." The radio operator answers, "I thought we were done when the fighter hit." Another voice adds, quieter, "I thought we were done when we dropped the gear." They laugh, but the laughter has edges. It's not joy, it's release. Bragg sits apart for a moment, staring at his hands like he's expecting them to still be gripping the yoke. Engel sits nearby, rubbing his eyes, replaying the approach. Those tiny corrections, the wobble that could have grown, the flare held back like a secret. And then, inevitably, the war asks its next question. "Back up tomorrow," someone says, half joking, half testing reality. It's the kind of question that makes the room go quieter than it should. Because everyone knows the answer. Yes, if not tomorrow, soon. The machine keeps moving. The missions keep coming. There are always more targets, always more briefings, always another formation climbing into cold air with flak waiting like teeth. And that's where the story does its most important work. It doesn't promise safety. It doesn't promise you'll come home. It simply proves that the margins can be wider than you think. If you keep your head, if you keep the aircraft under you, if you keep doing your job when panic would be easier. The next morning, another crew walks past the wrecked fortress. They slow down, stare at the bracetail, the torn fuselage, the missing stabilizer. One of them whistles low. No way. A crew chief answers without looking up from his work. Way. The crew climbs into their own B-17 and straps in. Engines roar. The runway appears again. The sky waits indifferent. And as they lift off, the image of that half-tailed fortress comes with them. Not as superstition, but as a reminder. The airplane can take punishment you can't imagine. The question is whether you can keep flying it when it does. Because out over Europe, flak doesn't care about your story. Fighters don't care about your courage. Mid-air collisions don't announce themselves politely. One moment you're in formation, steady, ordinary. The next moment the sky is ripping open behind you. And somewhere ahead, you'll have to decide, just like Bragg did, whether you bail out into unknown territory or try to bring a dying machine home with trembling hands and a controlled breath. And in the cold air of the next mission, when the first flak bursts bloom near the formation like dark flowers, someone will glance at the other fortresses and wonder, silently, if it happens to us, can we do what they did? Yendi,